this, we'd be doing GM Perez-Vizquez's claim is that teacher strikes in Washington was a necessary action needed to bring a mutual concession. Her first claim was first is a school delayed due to teacher strikes. Her second claim was teacher unions organized meetings with teachers and meet with districts. And her third claim was teacher strikes ended with demands being met. Gina's first claim was that more than 14 school districts in Washington went on strike and how it was necessary action and how students were not affected. But Washington State School Directors Association mentioned over a third of Washington school districts are going to lose 50% or more of their local Levi fundings. Communities are funding money to school for programs for kids, and this money will be going to teachers affecting students' education because the money for other activities won't be funded. It was also affecting charter schools. The Washington Supreme Court was upheld most of the state charter school law, eliminating the specter that the classroom serving about 3,400 students might have to close. This affected many kids because they were not going to get the education they needed because teachers were getting paid more and the charter schools had no direct control, and it was being allowed by the state constitution. The Washington State Charter Schools Association cheered that ruling as a win for public education and a big step forward in the fight to close the opportunity gap that persists in our state. Charter schools did not agree with this. This was not beneficial for them because they were losing most of their money they were losing money they were getting. Also, 3 years ago, the court held the state in contempt and issued fines of $1,100 a day for failure to comply with the ruling. Because teachers were striking and students were not showing up to class, this was causing schools to lose money from the government. Her second and third claim was teacher unions bargains with district and administrations for high salary wages, and the demands were met. But demands were not equally made. Washington School District Association said school districts will not receive the same amount of fundings for the amount of teachers. Cost of living plays a big part because districts in higher cost areas are receiving additional funds from the state. But there's more to it than according to the Senator Raven Carley. Schools that are right next to each other will not receive the same pay because some districts are receiving monies per teachers while other schools are receiving additional fundings on new formulas set by the legislature. It will be harder for teachers to get the money they want if they're being funded differently. Also, the district administrative also said that means an increase in fundings will not be followed by reduction of fundings in the near future. This will cause teachers to strike again in the future and will not be able to work as well as they did in the past because of the money they have lost. Transitions from local to state funding is taking a financial toll. According to Judy Martison, superintendent of Diringer School, it is throwing everything off on how to be able to manage the money because not every district will be receiving the same money. Even some teachers had to quit because their demands were not being made. In the end, striking was not the best idea for every district just because they didn't have the equal pay and a lot of students were being affected by it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, the original points are labeled pretty clearly. The first of the supporting points that you're responding to suggest that there's actually not going to be the same amount of money that they're getting. First, the schools are losing money because they went on strike, which sounds like there is a negative consequence to the action. The charter school issue was a little bit confusing because at one point it sounds like the decision supports the charter schools and that they're cheering it on, and then another point it sounds like you've got a piece of evidence that comes out exactly the opposite and says charter schools are really unhappy about this and the way it went. And I was confused about how this is relevant to the particular point that's being presented, and it seems like it's contradictory. So I'm not exactly sure how this information is relevant to the argument. And it may be relevant to something that the advocate said, but there wasn't any discussion of those details. The second point's a little bit clearer, where in essence you're saying the bargaining did not result in the demands being met exactly the way the advocate has portrayed it. For example, the schools have a different financing system. They have different formulas that they're using, and so the schools are not going to have the same resources, and the teacher's not going to get paid the same amount as somebody in a neighboring district. If that was in fact the objective of the strikes and it hasn't resulted in that outcome, then it seems to suggest that the strikes were really not particularly effective. And I think that's why we needed a little bit more clarity on what the original argument was from the advocate. And I understand that there was some difficulty with that because it was sort of a convoluted topic to begin with. The notion that there will be future strikes possible, I think that's also a good counterclaim. I think you need a little bit more information on that. And then you've got a pretty good summary piece of evidence there. So I thought the second argument was clear in how it applies to the advocate's position. The first argument, you've got information there, but it's a little bit inconsistent on the way it's being presented. All right, thank you.